Welcome to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives, where we expose predators, dive into the minds of evildoers, and help you and your loved ones avoid them. I'm your host, Deborah Dobbs. I'm an author and victim advocate with a reputation for rattling cages. Hello, I'm back. For those of you who are new, thank you for listening, for joining me today. And for those who are like the loyal listeners, thank you for being patient and waiting while I came back. I thought I might wait until I had my office redone, but the rate at which I'm moving is so slow that I decided I just need to get on with it and get back to podcasting, and you guys can watch the magic occur over the months. I'm going to kick off this podcast with, diving deep into some heavy stuff, which, of course, I am, because this is Dark Minds, Shattered Lives. The next few episodes, we'll be talking about things like psychosis and psychopathy, illicit drugs, the wild world of undercover narcotics. And so we're going to start, kind of lay the groundwork by starting with, what's the difference between psychosis and psychopathy? And what sets them off? And what is the difference between psychopathy and sociopathy? People often use these terms interchangeably because they sound alike, but they're actually vastly different. But I'm going to remind everybody, I'm not a licensed therapist or a medical doctor. My knowledge comes from my education and a career. So I have a bachelor's in sociology from UT Austin. I have a master's in sociology where it was an emphasis on criminology and deviant behavior from the University of North Texas, and I have worked for 30 years in mental health and crime victim advocacy. In addition, I'm always doing research and interviewing experts and trying to stay sharp. So with that disclaimer behind us, what is the difference between psychotic and psychopathic? Because you'll hear people call someone a psycho when they're not at all suffering from psychosis, and you'll hear the term psychopath thrown around if you just don't like somebody's being obnoxious, whatever the case. That's a term like narcissist is just thrown around, but psychopathy is really, really serious. I don't use that term lightly. I wrote a book called The Psychotic Son. It's been out a couple years. It's gotten some very good reviews, getting some more traction lately, but the villain in it is not psychotic. The villain is a psychopath. And it was important to me as an author to have something in there to show that, as an author, I know the difference, and that the book is not going to display inaccurately someone who's suffering from psychosis. So I have a prologue, and don't worry, it's not like shameless promotion. I just, a little bit maybe, but I like this very brief response that explains the difference in psychosis and psychopathy, but it's just done in a way that is relatable. This is a mom talking to a neighbor who has charged across the lawn and told her, "Keep your psycho son away from my family," and calls him, a psychotic, and calls him a psycho. And she says, "People have often called him psychotic. If that were true, my heart would ache for him. But there would be hope, because he could recover and heal. If he were indeed psychotic, as you say, it would mean he had the capacity to love and to live a normal life. But he is something entirely different and sinister. My heart does not ache for him, and he's irredeemable." So I like the way that kind of gets us started on the differences, and now we can get into the sciencey stuff. Psychosis can be described as the brain kind of taking a hard left from reality. You think about hallucinations, delusions, completely disorganized thoughts. It's not a disease, but it's a symptom, very severe symptom, almost like a fever for your mind. It shows up in conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, it's rare, or even severe depression. But it can also be triggered by external factors. The first is just mental health disorders existing mental health disorders, like I mentioned, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder. Those are primary triggers. Often psychosis may emerge because they're untreated or undertreated. And then you can have something like stress, severe stress, escalate and trigger or precipitate a psychotic break. Then there's substance abuse. This one some people aren't going to like cannabis, especially high potency THC, has been known to cause psychotic break. Amphetamines, meth, cocaine, LSD, even alcohol can induce psychosis. Take the case of Bryn, and I don't know if I say her name right, Spejcher, Spejcher. So Bryn, she was young, 32, audiologist, living in California, no history of violence, was not a drug user. And she experienced something that's like straight out of a nightmare, but she dragged a whole lot of people along with her. She and her boyfriend decided to smoke weed and took a hit off a bong that was just loaded with incredibly potent cannabis. It was like 31.8% THC. She started hallucinating. She was believing she was dead, and she heard voices that were telling her to kill her boyfriend so that she could come back to life. And she did. She stabbed her boyfriend 108 times. She killed him. She also hurt her dog. So I guess she stabbed her dog. She stabbed herself 43 times. The cops had to use tasers and batons to subdue her into submission. And then experts, including a forensic psychiatrist, agreed that this was actually cannabis-induced psychosis. A very rare, but a very real thing. It's high-potency weed can mess with your brain. And we're going to talk about this more. I'm going to talk about this with Eric Gelhaus in an upcoming episode, so I'm not going to get into it deep today. But the bottom line is the weed of today is not the Cheech and Chong or Dudes Lebowski's weed, period. Very, very different stuff people are using now. So what else can induce psychosis? Regular medication, like prescribed medication, like antidepressants, but even prednisone, certain steroids and stimulants can rarely, but they can, trigger psychosis as a side effect, especially if they're misprescribed and they're prescribed to somebody that is susceptible or vulnerable because of other conditions like mental health conditions. There's a wild and heartbreaking story illustrating this. It was in July 2004, a man named David Carmichael, father, husband, known to be very, very loving, kind of a fitness guy, regular guy, hit a rough patch after getting laid off or losing his job. And he was prescribed Paxil, an antidepressant, to cope with the depression. But apparently nobody warned him about the potential side effects. And things went south. And when they went south badly. And so I do want to say that you must consult with the doctor and communicate with the doctor when you're getting off of an antidepressant or you're going to get back onto one. And these things are complicated. They make me nervous. So anyway, David Carmichael starts spiraling into a frightening delusional state. And he became convinced that his 11-year-old son, Ian, who had mild epilepsy, was brain damaged and dangerous, a threat to his family. I believe he thought he was going to harm his daughter. And in his convoluted, warped mind, he believed that killing Ian was an act of love. And so after having dinner, like what he knew was going to be his son's last dinner, and taking him to a hotel and having, fun that night, he gave him sleeping pills and they strangled him. And then Dad watched TV for a few hours before calling the police. So he was charged with first-degree murder. And then a psychiatrist said, hey, this was psychosis that was likely triggered by Paxil. And so David was found not criminally responsible. He spent some time in a psychiatric hospital, and then he was released in 2009. He's adamant that the drug kind of flipped a switch in his brain, and the drug company pushed back and said that Paxil's generally safe. Anyway, he's out trying to push for better awareness about prescription drugs. His wife and his daughter stand by him. But that wound never heals. That's devastating. The fourth trigger, something that can trigger psychosis, is not common, but it's one of the most common triggers, is stress, like extreme stress and trauma. And so it can be like job loss, a loved one dies, abuse, an abusive situation, isolated incident or ongoing can participate a psychotic episode, especially again with someone that has mental health condition already, like an existing mental health problem. The fifth trigger, sleep deprivation, which often is going to coexist with stress and trauma. So, but a prolonged lack of sleep disrupts brain function and potentially triggers psychosis in someone who's vulnerable. Medical conditions like neurological disorders are another trigger. Encephalitis, metabolic imbalances, even like a B12 deficiency can induce psychotic symptoms. Postpartum psychosis is a thing, the postpartum period. And you think about that. You've got these hormonal shifts, a lot of stress. There's few things more stressful than a newborn. And then you add the sleep deprivation, and that's like a dangerous cocktail. Things will influence risk, like genetics and mental health history, and early intervention is key. Psychosis tends to be temporary. It can be a short-term kind of glitch. And so the sooner you get help, the better, and the more likely it is to keep it temporary. So what is not temporary is psychopathy. Psychopathy is a personality disorder. It's not a mental illness like psychosis. It's not a symptom of anything. It's just how somebody's wired. Most people think of, cold, calculating, zero remorse, zero empathy. These people who are psychopaths don't lose a wink of sleep after hurting someone. We're talking about people who can lie through their teeth and manipulate like pros. There's a study that shows that psychopaths are more likely to convince parole boards to let them out compared to non-psychopathic offenders. So that's not scary, is it? With psychopathy, it's not about losing touch with reality. A psychopath has not lost touch with reality. It's just not caring. He doesn't care. She doesn't care. And so just like psychosis and psychopathy are not interchangeable, psychopathy and sociopathy are not interchangeable. People will refer to a psychopath as a sociopath like they're one and the same, and they are not. And you hear professionals debate this as well. Like they'll still use the term interchangeably, or they will disagree on the difference. So I'm going to refer to Dr. Kent Keel. He is known as the Psychopath Whisperer, and he's authored a book by the same title. And so I'm going to quote where he distinguishes between sociopathy and psychopathy. He says, sociopathy, I'm quoting, includes a broad, heterogeneous category of individuals who act antisocially, the causes of which are believed to be social and environmental in nature. Psychopathy is a term grounded in biology and genetics and is truly agnostic to the causes or etiology. In other words, genetics and the makeup of the brain, as well as the environment, contribute to the construct of psychopathy, end quote. And the really interesting thing in the book, you can read about it in the Psychopath Whisperer, if you like this sort of thing, which I do, it was the brain scans will show that psychopaths have less activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain that handles emotions like fear or guilt. Sometimes we call it the lizard brain. Functional MRI is the scan that Dr. Keel talks about in the Psychopath Whisperer, and he's done thousands of them on prisoners who he assessed and interviewed and feels strongly that these people are psychopaths. And they'll do a functional MRI, an fMRI on them, and it'll show the way the brain is reacting to certain like stimulus. So and it may be images. If I put pictures in front of you, let's say you're a normal person, I hope, and I'm going to lay pictures in front of you. I'm going to put a picture down of a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses, and then the next picture is a sunflower field. The next picture is a box of tissues, like Kleenex, and the next is a book, and then the next is a picture of a really bloody, gory crime scene photo. That's what you're looking at. And then there's a stress ball in the next picture. So a normal person, even someone who's exposed to crime scene photos, is still going to have a reaction. Their brain is going to show some different activity when that photograph comes up compared to the others. It's going to be different, except if it's a psychopath, then you don't see those changes. It's kind of like it's every other picture. There's just no reaction to it. So these fMRIs have shown that the brain it's really just different. It doesn't function like a normal brain. And then if you toss in childhood trauma, abuse, it can amplify psychopathic traits. But I believe, and the research seems to support, that psychopaths are born. They're not necessarily made. There's just certain environmental factors that can enhance psychopathic traits that exist. Unlike psychosis, like we saw, the psychotic break triggered by drugs or stress, like Bryn's episode with THC, David Carmichael's Paxil disaster. You're a psychopath for life. It's a lifelong deal, and treatment is tough. Therapy might help manage the behavior, but there's no, cure for a personality baked in like that. Psychopaths can wreak havoc. They might be a con artist or, in extreme cases, violent offenders, but not all are violent, not all are criminals. Some are just the slick CEO or a neurosurgeon or an astronaut or the charmer next door. So it's important to be able to recognize some of the traits. And there's 20 of them on Robert Hare's Psychopathy checklist. Recently, it was kind of interesting. I had my editor called to tell me what we were talking. She didn't call to tell me this, but she told me while we were talking that, she had another reader tell her that really liked the book, liked The Psychotic Son, thought it was a really good read, scary. That's a very common reaction. But that the villain was like, is this really realistic? Is this somebody really that bad? And yeah, there are. It's a minority of the population are psychopaths. Some have said 1%. I don't know if it's that low, but it's a minority. But a true psychopath, yeah, they're kind of terrifying. Even if they're not violent, even if they're, a CEO, it's good to know. It's good to, be able to recognize them so you know what you're dealing with and you can be very careful. So Robert Hare's Psychopathy checklist, it's available online. You can't administer it. I can't administer it. It's an assessment that requires a professional, not just any licensed professional therapist or psychiatrist could administer it. It takes specific training, and it's often done in prison populations or in clinical settings, because psychopaths don't usually just voluntarily go to a therapist because they typically don't think anything's wrong with them. That's why it's very hard to treat a psychopath, because they just think they're all right. They may know something, they're different, and they're not like everybody else, but it's working. So the assessment is a little complicated. It's going to be used in combination with interviews, and observing someone's behavior, even talking to other family members, looking at files. It takes research. But the cool thing about the assessment and this tool is that the traits are listed for you. But because I want to keep these episodes short, I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to go over the 20 traits for you in another episode. It'll be another short episode, and I just try to keep them short because I'm not. I'm nowhere near a Joe Rogan or Candace Owens or Ian Carroll, so my episodes, they're bite-sized. So until the next episode, trust your gut and know your exits.